On Friday evening, the Senate Intelligence Committee announced that James Comey has agreed to testify in open session before the committee. Now, he was sought after by several congressional committees. Clearly, he decided to go with this one first, and we are told that he will do that testifying sometime after Memorial Day.
Okay, and that'll obviously be a very big moment in Washington. Nancy, what are the key questions that the Senate Intelligence Committee will want answered from Comey?
Well, first of all, they want to hear more about the timeline of his firing, how he found out, whether he believes that the president fired him because he wouldn't pledge his loyalty to the president. They want to know more about what's in those memos that he apparently kept, keeping track essentially of every time that the president tried to ask him about the investigation or tried to pressure him to, in one instance, stop the investigation into his former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. Then beyond that, they're going to want to know about the FBI's investigation itself, where it stood when he left the FBI, whether there were any other attempts by the administration or even by officials within the Department of Justice to try to quash the investigation or push it in a certain direction. They'll probably want to know what he thinks of the appointment of special counsel Robert Mueller. And what's really notable here is that, he could have insisted that he would only testify in closed session with the committee, behind closed doors, where the public wouldn't be able to hear it, because the questions are going to be very sensitive, and there are certainly going to be some questions that he's not going to be able to answer. Without a doubt, his testimony is going to be very uncomfortable for the administration and possibly even uncomfortable for himself. But he has agreed to do it in open session, which means that the public will be able to hear everything he has to say about the president's decision to fire him.
And Nancy, the Rosenstein briefings were classified, but some members of Congress have divulged some details of the meetings. What are you hearing on the Hill?
That's right. Members of Congress are famous for having their own interpretations of what exactly classified means, what they can say, what they can't. It was sort of amusing to see members come out of this meeting, and one would, dish and tell us this was said and that was said and this was said, and then the next one would come out and we'd ask the same question. They say, well, I can't get into that. I'm not allowed to talk about it. In fact, at one point today, Elijah Cummings said that in response to one of my questions, and then he was told by a reporter from another network, well, Darrell Issa was just out here and he told us everything. And Elijah Cummings said, oh really, what did he say? And sort of implied, well, if he's willing to talk about it, then so am I. But we do understand that House members were warned when they went into this meeting that they shouldn't divulge too many details of what Rosenstein told them. There was a feeling that senators really spilled a little too much the day before. So House members, we found, were a little more circumspect. But then after the fact, the Department of Justice actually put out a transcript of what Rosenstein said in his opening statement to House members. We don't have a transcript of all the back and forth between the members and Rosenstein. After that, we know that they asked him a lot of questions that he either wouldn't or couldn't answer. There were a number of Democrats in particular who left very frustrated, saying that they hadn't learned anything new, that he wouldn't answer the questions that were most important to them. But they weren't all that surprised by it either. After all, this is an ongoing and very sensitive investigation, and they're never going to get all the information that they want.
Enough has come out that we know Rosenstein has said he believed Comey should have been fired for quite a while. He says he solicited feedback from lawyers at the Justice Department. So basically saying that the whole administration was on the same page, whether Trump asked for that memo or not. So what do we know about the timeline that led up to the dismissal? And if everyone had the same thoughts, why does that timeline matter?
Well, it's very interesting. In his opening statement to lawmakers, Rosenstein sort of laid out what it was that he thought Comey had really done wrong. He felt that Comey's press conference that he gave last July, for example, when he essentially exonerated and criticized Hillary Clinton at the same time, he felt that that was very unfair to Hillary Clinton. Rosenstein did, and he thought that it violated Department of Justice guidelines. He said the same thing about Comey's decision to send a letter to Congress 11 days before the election, telling Congress that he was reopening the investigation. He said that Comey did that over the advice of the Department of Justice and that it was the wrong thing to do, and once again left the appearance that the FBI was meddling in the 2016 elections. And so Rosenstein made a very strong case that nobody pushed him to say that he thought that Comey had done a bad job and should be fired. He said that these were his own feelings that he had written down and that he wasn't pressured by the president, for example, to put all this into a memo that could then be cited as the rationale for Comey's firing. He said, I stand by everything I said. But the timing, the reason that it seemed so suspicious to a lot of members is because you had top White House officials, including the vice president, giving a totally different version of events when they first explained the president's decision to fire James Comey. They came out and said, well, the president got this blockbuster memo from Rod Rosenstein so critical of James Comey that he said, wow, I've got to fire this guy. But very quickly, the facts came out that actually the president had been planning to do this all along. You heard the president himself say that in an interview, and now Rosenstein concedes that even he and the Attorney General had been talking about the fact that Comey might need to go as far back as the winter. So I think the big problem here is not that the president decided to fire James Comey, although that is a problem to some people, but also that the administration's stories about why he did it and how he arrived at that decision really have shifted over time.
Nancy Cordes reporting from Washington, D.C. Nancy, thank you.
You're welcome.